My mother clapped her hands for quiet at my rehearsal dinner and told 40 guests my wedding was a little party. Then she announced that she and my father were flying to Nashville at dawn to save my brother's recording studio deal. He needed them more, she said, smiling the whole time like she was handing me a gift instead of taking one away. She did not lower her voice once. She wanted the room to hear it. By morning they were gone, and I walked myself down the aisle, past 2 empty chairs with folded name cards taped to the seats, on the arm of a man I had known for exactly 3 weeks. I smiled through the whole ceremony. My hands never shook. What none of them knew, what my mother would not learn until a stranger's phone made me go viral by Monday morning, was exactly whose arm I was holding. I'm Nora Ashby, 33 years old, and the man at the end of that aisle had every reason to become the biggest secret in that restaurant. My mother thought she had humiliated me in front of everyone I loved. What she actually did was hand me the cleanest, most public exit of my entire life, and she did it without a single push from me. Let me start the night before, because that is where she made her mistake, the one she is still paying for. The rehearsal dinner was held in the private back room of a steakhouse off Burnside in Portland. Exposed brick, low copper lighting, a long table set with cream linens I had chosen myself 2 months earlier. I paid for that dinner. I paid for the wedding that would follow it the next morning too. Every flower, every rented chair, every dollar of it pulled from an account I built with my own 2 hands, over 11 years of running an event design company out of a converted garage. I want you to hold on to that fact, because it matters more than you think once the rest of this unfolds. My mother arrived 20 minutes late in a dress the color of a warning sign, and she hugged the room before she hugged me. That did not surprise me. I had 33 years of practice reading the order of her affection, and I always landed somewhere after whichever relative had the newest gossip to offer her. My father came in right behind her, already tugging at his collar, already glancing toward the exit, the way he glances toward every exit in every room he has ever entered with my mother. Wendell Ashby has spent his entire career trying to be the most agreeable man in every conversation he secretly wants to leave, and he is very good at it. He manages a regional territory for a national hospitality company, and he has spent 11 years chasing one man's approval so hard that he has forgotten how to chase anything else, including his own daughter's happiness. My brother Miles walked in last, phone pressed to his ear, telling someone he would deal with it Monday. Miles is 29 and has been about to deal with it Monday for as long as I can remember, owning a functioning memory. He slid into a chair without acknowledging the table, still talking, still gesturing with his free hand, like the conversation on the other end of that phone was the only real thing happening in the building. I stood at the head of a table I had arranged with my own 2 hands and watched my family walk into the celebration of my wedding like they were doing me a favor simply by showing up. Then dinner happened, and my mother stood, and she tapped her wine glass with a fork. Not a soft tap, a summons, the kind she has been perfecting since I was a child, the kind that makes a whole room fall silent because that is exactly what rooms do for women like Patrice Ashby. I want to say something, she began, before it's too late to say it. I remember thinking, foolishly, that she was about to toast me. Nora has always been our independent one, she said, smiling around the table like she was handing out compliments instead of loading a weapon. She never needed us, so I know she'll understand. The word understand landed in my stomach like a swallowed stone, cold and heavy and immediate. I already knew what was coming. I had spent an entire childhood learning the shape of that word in my mother's mouth. Your brother has an opportunity in Nashville, she went on, turning to look at me with an expression that dared me to argue. It's time-sensitive, it's real, and your father and I are going to be there for him. We fly out at 6 tomorrow morning. 6 tomorrow morning. My ceremony started at 11. It's a beautiful little party you've put together, sweetheart, she said, reaching across the table to pat my hand like she was consoling me, instead of gutting me in front of 40 guests. But Miles needs his family right now, and you have never once needed anybody. 40 people heard my mother call my wedding a little party. 40 people watched her choose plane tickets over the front row of my ceremony, and she smiled while she did it, warm and certain, as she had just done something generous instead of something unforgivable. That smile is the part I have never been able to shake. Not the words, the smile, and the comfort sitting behind it, like this was simply how mothers were supposed to behave. I set down my fork. I did not stand. I did not raise my voice, because in my family the person who raises their voice loses, and I had stopped losing a long time ago, on purpose, at great cost, over many years. Okay, I said. That was the entire response. One word. My mother blinked, because a fight was the only thing she had come prepared for, and I refused to hand her one. Miles glanced up from his phone just long enough to mutter, "Don't make it weird, Nora," before dropping his eyes back to the screen. My father studied the tablecloth as it owed him money it could never repay. And across the table, 2 seats down, a man I had known for exactly 3 weeks set down his glass and looked at me. Not at my mother, at me. The way you look at someone when you already understand the full shape of what just happened, and you are simply waiting to see if she is going to be all right. His name was Desmond. I will tell you the rest of who he really was when it is time, and it will not be soon, because that patience is exactly what saved me. For now, all you need to know is that he was the only person sitting at that table who understood precisely what my mother had just done, and precisely what it was about to cost. Not me, them. He did not say a single word in that moment. He simply gave the smallest nod, the kind you give when a door is finally, quietly closing on a room you are relieved to leave behind, and something in my chest settled into place for the first time in years. I raised my own glass, slow and steady, and I said, "To family, the ones who show up." Nobody drank to it. That was fine. I was not talking to them anyway. The dinner ended early after that. People do not linger over a fresh wound, no matter how politely everyone pretends otherwise. My Aunt Vivian squeezed my hand on her way out and whispered that my mother was a piece of work, honey, in a voice loud enough that I suspect she wanted Patrice to hear it too. My best friend Delia stayed behind to help me stack the extra chairs the restaurant had brought in, and she did not stop muttering curses under her breath the entire time, folding linen napkins with the kind of aggression usually reserved for wringing out a wet towel. "You're not seriously going to be okay tomorrow," Delia said, snapping a napkin flat. "Tell me the truth right now." "I'm going to be more okay than anyone at that table expects," I told her. She stopped folding and stared at me. "What does that mean?" I looked toward the door Desmond had walked through 10 minutes earlier, already gone before the awkward goodbyes started, already understanding, I think, that I needed to handle the rest of that room without an audience of one watching too closely. "It means I've had 3 weeks to think about this exact moment," I said, "and I think about things very carefully. Delia has known me since we were 19 years old, roommates in a dorm that smelled permanently of burnt popcorn, and she knows exactly what my voice sounds like when I am hiding something enormous behind a calm face." She narrowed her eyes at me. "Nora, what did you do?" "Nothing," I said. "Yet." I drove home alone that night, through streets slick with early July rain, past the closed shops on Hawthorne, past the little bakery where I used to sit with my grandfather every Sunday morning as a kid, back when he was still alive to sit with. My apartment was full of half-packed boxes, because I was supposed to be moving into a new life with a new last name the very next day, and instead I sat down on the floor between 2 of those boxes, and I did not cry. I want to be honest with you here, because a lot of people telling stories like mine pretend the version of themselves in the middle of it was some kind of saint, calm and forgiving, and above it all, I was not. When my mother stood up and called my wedding a little party, something in me that had been quietly asking the same question for 33 years finally got its answer. The question was simple. What would I have to do to be chosen first, even once? The answer, it turned out, was nothing. There had never been an answer, because there had never been a version of me that qualified. Miles was the son who needed rescuing, I was the daughter who was expected to already be rescued, permanently, on my own, so that nobody ever had to spend a single ounce of worry on me. I want to give you 3 small pictures, because they explain everything that came after them, and they explain why by the time I sat on that floor, I was not surprised. I was only finally, completely certain. I was 9 years old the year I won the regional spelling bee for my age group. The finals fell on a Thursday evening. That same Thursday evening, Miles had a youth soccer scrimmage that did not even count toward the league standings. My parents went to the scrimmage. My grandfather, Otis, took me to the spelling bee instead, sat in the 3rd row in his good cardigan, and clapped so hard when I spelt the winning word that a woman 2 seats down asked if he was my father. I held up a small gold trophy to a room that did not have my mother in it. When we got home that night, my father asked Miles how the scrimmage went before he asked me anything at all. Miles's team had lost 11-2. My trophy sat in my backpack for 9 days before anyone in that house noticed it was there. I was 14 the year I had saved 11 months of babysitting money for a class trip to see the coast. A real trip, my first one without my parents. The week before we left, Miles wrecked his bicycle doing something reckless off a curb and needed stitches and a new bike, and my mother sat on the edge of my bed with her hand resting warm on my knee and told me, "You're the one who understands, Nora. Your brother falls apart, you never do." Then she took the trip money out of the envelope I had hidden in my sock drawer, and she said it like she was paying me a compliment instead of robbing me. I stayed home that spring and told all my friends I hadn't really wanted to go anyway. And I was 23, fresh out of a business program, the week I signed the lease on the tiny garage space that would eventually become my company. I called home to share the news, giddy with it, proud in a way I had not let myself feel about anything in years. My mother said, "That's nice, honey," and then immediately pivoted. "Listen, Miles is between things again. Could he stay with you for a while?" He stayed 4 months. He never once contributed to rent. He ate my groceries and left his dishes stacked in my sink and told his friends I was letting him crash there like it was a favor I had eagerly offered, and I let all of it happen, because being useful was the only currency I had ever been permitted to trade for love. 3 pictures. A trophy nobody noticed in a backpack, a stolen trip, a brother's dirty dishes in my sink, and underneath all 3 of them, the same unspoken law of my family, written before I was even old enough to read it for myself. Miles needs, and so Miles gets. Nora understands, and so Nora gives. Somewhere around 25, sitting alone in that same garage office late one night after a client had canceled and cost me a month's rent, I made a quiet decision that reshaped the rest of my life, and I want to tell you about it plainly, because it is the hinge that everything else in this story turns on. I decided to stop needing them, not to punish them for anything, to survive them. I stopped calling home when I was struggling. I built my company dollar by dollar, so I would never once have to ask my mother for a loan or a favor, or a soft place to land. I turned myself into precisely the daughter she had always described to other people, the one who never falls apart, but I did it entirely for myself, as armor, not as a gift I was offering her. What I did not understand until years later, sitting on my apartment floor the night before my own wedding, was that my armor had quietly become their permission. The stronger and more self-sufficient I made myself, the more freely they felt entitled to take from me, because a daughter who never appears to need anything is a daughter you can never quite be accused of failing. There is no crime in ignoring someone who insists she is fine. So when my mother stood up in that back room and called my wedding a little party, she was not breaking some new pattern. She was completing one that had been 33 years in the making, brick by patient brick. And some part of me, the 9-year-old with the unnoticed trophy, still sitting somewhere inside her chest, finally stopped waiting to be picked up off that floor. Most people, learning something like that all at once, break completely. I did the math instead. Because here is what my mother did not know, sitting at that table congratulating herself on her generosity toward Miles. She believed I was marrying a stranger out of loneliness, some rebound she assumed had followed a breakup she had never once bothered to ask me about. She had spent the entire 3-week engagement telling relatives I was rushing into something foolish and clearly not thinking straight, and it had never once occurred to her, not for a single second, to do the one thing that would have told her the whole truth. She never asked his last name. She never looked him up. I set my alarm for 6 the next morning, not to catch a flight, but simply to watch the sunrise on what was about to become the best day of my life, while the 3 people who were supposed to have raised me boarded a plane heading 4 hours south to rescue the one child who had never once been asked to grow up. Then I turned off the light, and for the first time in weeks, I slept without dreaming. Grandfather Otis died when I was 29, and I want to tell you about him properly, because without understanding what he meant to me, none of what happens later will make sense. He was my mother's father, a quiet man who had spent 40 years running a small hardware store on Alberta Street, before selling it and retiring into a life of crossword puzzles and Sunday breakfasts. While my parents orbited endlessly around whatever crisis Miles had manufactured that particular week, it was my grandfather who taught me to balance a checkbook at the kitchen table, who taught me to say no without apologizing for it afterwards, who drove 2 hours each way to sit in the 3rd row of every recital and science fair my parents forgot to attend. Before he died, he sat me down in his little kitchen with the yellowed linoleum floor and told me he had set aside a specific sum of money for my wedding day, held in a trust with my name on it, so that I would never once have to ask anyone's permission to be happy. $42,000, exactly, saved dollar by dollar over decades from a business that never made him rich, but always made him comfortable. He named my mother as the trustee, because that is simply what you do. You trust your own daughter to safeguard your granddaughter's gift until the day it is needed. I never saw a single dollar of it. When I got engaged, I asked my mother about it gently, the way you ask about something you already suspect is gone, and she told me, "Oh, honey, that got used up years ago on family things, you understand." And because I am who my entire childhood trained me to be, I said okay, and I paid for my own wedding out of my own account, and I told myself it did not matter. I did not yet know the truth. I would learn it soon enough, and when I did, it would break something in me that had been holding steady for a very long time. 3 weeks before that rehearsal dinner, my company had been hired to run the launch event for a boutique riverfront property in the Pearl District, one of those old converted warehouse buildings turned into something sleek and expensive. I did not know at the time who owned it. I never bother asking who owns a building. I ask where the power outlets are, where the loading dock is, whether the freight elevator actually works or just looks like it does. For 9 straight days, I all but lived on that site, running on coffee and adrenaline, wearing a hard hat over an updo I had done nice for absolutely no one, arguing with a lighting vendor at 1 in the morning about a cable that kept tripping the breaker. There was a man in a plain gray jacket who kept showing up around the edges of the chaos, moving folding chairs, carrying boxes of glassware, asking questions that were actually useful instead of the usual nervous small talk from someone standing around with nothing to do. I assumed he was one of the venue's part-time staff. I put him straight to work without a second thought. I once made him hold a wobbling ladder steady for nearly 40 minutes while I strung lights along an exposed beam, and I told him, only half joking, that he had a real future in event support if the rest of his career fell through. On the final night of setup, one of the actual property managers walked past and called him Mr. Cole, and I remember standing very still on that ladder, realizing I had spent 9 days bossing around the man who apparently owned the entire development. He found me afterwards, down by the loading dock, where I was coiling extension cords and bracing for the version of him I fully expected to appear, the one who would finally pull rank and remind me who I had actually been talking to all week. Instead, he said something I have never forgotten. He said, "You're the first person in years who treated me like a set of hands instead of a checkbook." And then he smiled, a little embarrassed, and admitted he had spent the entire 9 days trying to figure out how to ask me to dinner without it feeling like a wealthy man cornering an employee who technically worked for him. He said he could not find a way to do it that felt honest, so he just kept holding ladders instead, hoping I would eventually notice him on my own. I noticed him. I want that on the record clearly, for anyone who ever whispers the word gold digger later in this story, because someone eventually will. I fell for a man in a plain jacket who carried boxes and asked good questions. The fact that his company owned or operated dozens of properties across several states was something I learned much later, the way you eventually learn a person's coffee order, a small fact layered on top of the parts that actually mattered. If Desmond Cole had turned out to run that hardware store my grandfather once ran, I would have married him the same way, on the same schedule. Those were the 3 weeks my mother sneered at during every phone call leading up to the wedding, calling him some man I barely knew, telling relatives I was rushing into something reckless. 3 weeks of a man who learned my grandfather's name, and the whole story behind that stolen trust fund before he ever learned my parents' names. 3 weeks of someone asking me, every single evening without fail, whether I was actually happy, a question my own mother had not thought to ask me even once in over 3 decades. I stood in my kitchen the morning of the wedding, with the sun barely up, my dress hanging in its garment bag on the closet door, and I thought about my grandfather sitting in that third row clapping until his palms turned pink, and I thought about a man holding a ladder steady for 40 minutes just to be near me a little longer, and I understood with total clarity that I already had everything I needed to walk myself down that aisle without a single ounce of shame. The trip money had been stolen once, quietly, when I was 14. The trust had apparently vanished sometime after that, explained away with a shrug. But nobody, not my mother, not Miles, not the family I had spent a lifetime trying to earn a permanent seat inside of, could steal the part of me that had learned, dollar by dollar and lesson by lesson, exactly what I was worth without their approval attached to it. My phone buzzed on the counter. 6 in the morning exactly. I picked up the phone and read the text before I let myself feel anything about it. "Boarding now," my mother had written, followed by 3 exclamation points and a heart. "Wish us luck. Miles is so grateful. We'll celebrate you properly when we're back. Love you." 3 exclamation points. My mother has always used punctuation the way other people use perfume, spraying it heavily over something to cover up a smell underneath. I did not write back. I set the phone face down on the counter, made a cup of coffee I barely tasted, and I got married. The venue was a restored greenhouse on the outskirts of Portland, all black iron framework and old glass panels. Climbing jasmine wound through the trusses overhead, the kind of place I had fallen in love with the moment I stepped inside it 2 months earlier. I had booked it during that first giddy rush of the engagement, back when I still pictured my father's arm steady under my hand as I walked in. I had paid the deposit imagining that exact moment. I did not know yet, standing in that empty greenhouse 2 months ago, that the moment would never come. Delia zipped me into my dress in a small side room, while my Aunt Vivian carefully pinned my veil into place, and neither of them said one word about my parents. Instead, they talked about the weather, about how the morning light was pouring gold through the glass panels overhead, about the small bouquet of white ranunculus I was holding. They built a warm, ordinary little room around me out of nothing but kind, unremarkable words, and I have never loved 2 people more than I loved them both in those 10 minutes. Then Vivian asked gently, "Who's walking you out, honey?" And I could already hear the music starting on the other side of the door, 80 guests finding their seats in rows of white folding chairs. "I am," I said. "I'm walking myself." Delia's chin trembled immediately. I told her, gently, "Don't you dare." Because if she cried, I would cry, and I refused to walk down that aisle with a red nose on the happiest day of my life. She laughed, wet and furious all at once, and said, "Fine, but I already put your mother's name on both those empty chairs, so everyone in this room knows exactly who chose not to show up." She had already done it. When the greenhouse doors opened, the front row on my side held 2 chairs with small folded cards taped neatly to the seats. Patrice, Wendell, empty. She had printed and cut and taped those cards that very morning, out of equal parts spite and love, and I let them stay exactly where she placed them. Those two empty chairs became the single image I want you to hold on to through everything that follows, because they come back later, in a much larger room, in a much more public way. I stepped into the aisle by myself. 80 faces turned toward me at once, and I watched pity move through the crowd like wind rolling across an open field, small intakes of breath, hands pressed to hearts, a whisper somewhere near the back asking where her parents were. I had braced myself for exactly that reaction. I let it wash over me, and I kept walking anyway, because pity, I have learned, is simply love that arrived too late to actually help. At the end of the aisle stood Desmond in a charcoal suit, watching me the same steady way he had watched me at that dinner table the night before, like he already understood the entire shape of what was happening and was simply glad to be standing there when I arrived. Scattered through those 80 guests, I had already noticed on the walk-in were perhaps a dozen faces I did not recognize at all, people who had not come for me. A woman who I would later learn ran one of the largest hotel investment groups on the West Coast. Two men whose names sat carved into buildings I had walked past my whole life without knowing it. A quiet older gentleman who, according to something Desmond mentioned once, and never again, had turned down a knighthood a decade earlier. You do not gather a guest list like that for a stranger's rebound wedding. You gather it for something much more permanent. I reached the end of the aisle. Desmond took my hand, warm and steady, and he leaned in close and said quietly, "You look like a woman who knows exactly what she is doing." It remains the most romantic sentence anyone has ever spoken to me, because in that exact moment, it was completely true. We said our vows in front of the tall glass panels, sunlight pooling across the stone floor, and I meant every single word of mine. When the officiant asked who gives this woman to be married, there was a long, deliberate silence where a father was supposed to answer, and into that silence I said clearly, "I give myself." 80 people exhaled at once, a soft collective sound that moved through the greenhouse like a held breath finally released. Somewhere behind me, near the back row, a phone came up. I did not see it happen in the moment. I learned afterwards it belonged to Petra, the 19-year-old assistant working with our photographer, who thought the moment was simply too beautiful not to keep. She posted 30 seconds of it that same night, a caption underneath the clip that read, "She gave herself away. Her parents skipped it for a family emergency. Watch her do it alone anyway." That was Saturday evening. By Sunday afternoon, the clip had crossed 40,000 views. By Sunday midnight, it had climbed past 400,000, and somewhere buried inside those growing numbers, without a single member of my family noticing yet, the internet had already begun doing the thing it does best. Freezing frames, zooming in on the folded name cards taped to two empty chairs, beginning, slowly and quietly, to recognize the man standing at the end of my aisle. That is precisely when the ground under my father's entire career started to shift beneath him. He simply could not feel it moving yet. Before I take you into that Monday, into the calls and the voicemail that finally made my mother's voice crack, I want to ask you for one small thing. If your chest tightened even a little when my mother tapped that wine glass, take a second right now and hit like and subscribe. It genuinely helps a story like this one find the people who need to hear it tonight. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I read every single one, and I like knowing exactly how far this has traveled. Now let me take you into the week my mother finally learned who I married. Monday morning I was on my honeymoon, not somewhere tropical, just a rented cabin 2 hours outside Portland along the Sandy River, a place with terrible cell service and a good porch overlooking the water. Desmond and I had agreed to save the real trip for later, when things settled. I had turned my phone face down on purpose the moment we arrived. When I finally flipped it over, I had 63 missed calls from my mother, 11 from my father, and one voicemail from a number I did not recognize. I listened to the unknown number first. That is a habit from running my own company for over a decade. the unknown number is almost always the one that matters most. It was a woman's voice, crisp and professional. Miss Ashby, or I suppose it's Ms. Cole now. Congratulations. My name is Renata Foss. I'm calling from the office of Harold Preston. A short pause. Harold is your father's employer. I believe you know that already. He would very much like to speak with you at your convenience. It's a somewhat delicate matter, thank you. I sat on that porch and let the river be quiet for a full minute. Harold Preston was not simply my father's employer. He sat 3 levels above my father, as regional president of the entire company, a man my father had spent 11 years chasing the approval of like a dog chasing a car it would never actually catch. There was a framed photograph of my father shaking Harold Preston's hand at some industry conference, and it hung in our family hallway, higher than any photograph of me. And Renata Foss had called me Ms. Cole, my married name, before my own mother had bothered learning it. I set the phone down and finally understood the true size of what was coming. Not for me, I was fine. Better than fine, but for my father. Because Harold Preston's office does not call the estranged daughter of a mid-level regional manager on a random Monday morning about a delicate matter unless that daughter has just very publicly married someone Harold Preston has spent years and considerable money trying to get into a room with. I picked the phone back up and started working through my mother's voicemails in order, oldest first, so I could hear the exact moment her voice shifted from anger into fear. It took her about 4 messages to get there. The first, Saturday night, hours after the ceremony, her voice bright and hard as glass. Nora, I saw that little stunt with the chairs. Cards with our names, really. That's beneath you. Call me back, and we'll discuss how you're going to apologize to your brother for making his trip about you. Making his trip about me. I had gotten married that day. He had flown to Nashville, and somehow I was the one making things about myself. The second, Sunday morning. Your cousin says there's a video going around. I hope you're happy. This is exactly the kind of drama that follows you everywhere. Fix it. The third, Sunday afternoon. The brightness starting to fracture at the edges. People are messaging me. Nora, strangers saying awful things. I don't care that you didn't post it yourself. Handle this. Take it down. I want you to notice the pattern threaded through every single message. Not once did she ask if I was okay. Not once did she say she was sorry to have missed my wedding. Every message was an instruction. Fix it. Handle it. Take it down. To my mother, I had always been a problem she could simply hand back to myself. The fourth voicemail came Sunday night, and it was where her voice finally changed, slower now, the brightness gone, something colder and more frightened surfacing underneath it. Nora, it's Mom. Call me back, please. Your father's boss just saw the video. A pause, a shaky breath. He recognized someone. We need to understand what we're looking at here. Who is that man, the one you married? Who is he? There it was. Sunday night. 33 years, and 1 viral weekend into my life. My mother finally asked the one question she should have asked the very day I got engaged. I did not call her back. Instead, I told Desmond about the message from Preston's office, and he listened the way he always listens, completely, without once reaching for the wheel of the conversation. When I finished, he said quietly, "You know this is going to land hard on your father." "I know," I told him. "You could stop it. 1 phone call from me and I would drop the whole thing," he said. I looked at him a long moment. "I don't want you to stop it," I said. "And I don't want you to push it either. I need you to do nothing. I need everyone to just keep being exactly who they already are. That's all it takes." Monday afternoon, Miles finally called. I let it ring through once out of principle, then answered on the second attempt because I genuinely wanted to hear it, wanted to hear what the golden child sounds like when the light starts moving off him for the very first time. "You have to fix this," he said instead of hello. "Mom's a wreck, Dad's not talking. Do you know people are calling his office?" "I heard," I said. "So take it down." "I didn't post it, Miles." Then call whoever did. God, you always do this. You always make yourself the victim. It was one weekend. We had a real emergency down there. Real money. And you turned your little wedding into a public execution. There it was again. A little wedding. The Nashville thing didn't even work out. He added, quieter now. It fell through, so Mom and Dad flew down for nothing, and now this. I filed that fact away without a word. I did not know yet exactly what it meant. I only knew Miles, and I knew that when Miles said a thing fell through, it usually meant money had gone somewhere it was never coming back from. That night, my cousin Renee sent me 11 screenshots from a family group chat I had never once been added to, a chat that included my mother, father, Miles, and 2 aunts, and by accident, Renee, who had never removed herself. I read all 11 messages twice, and that is where I finally learned exactly what my grandfather's trust had funded, and exactly how long the phrase little party had already been rehearsed before my mother ever spoke it out loud at that dinner table. The messages went back 6 weeks. I read them slowly, in order, and the room around me seemed to get colder with every line I scrolled through. My mother, 6 weeks earlier. Miles still needs another 22 by Friday, or he loses his spot on the studio deal. We have to move Dad's money now. Not Dad's money. My grandfather's money. Otis's trust. The $42,000 he had saved dollar by careful dollar behind a hardware store counter for 4 decades. The money he handed my mother to hold for me, because that is simply what you do. You trust your daughter to protect your granddaughter's gift. I never saw a single cent of it. When I asked about it gently before the engagement, she told me it had gotten used up years ago on family things. You understand. It had not been used up years ago. It had been moved 6 weeks earlier, quietly, into Miles's Nashville recording studio investment. The same emergency my parents skipped my wedding to fly down and rescue. The next message made me set my coffee down and stare at the wall for a long moment. My father, 5 weeks earlier. Nora won't ask about it again. She never pushes. That's the beauty of her. She's the only one of our kids who doesn't need managing. That's the beauty of her. She doesn't need managing. My entire lifetime of swallowed hurt and quiet compliance had been reclassified, right there in black and white, as a convenient asset. I was the child you could safely take from, because I would never once demand it back. 3 weeks earlier, Miles had complained in the thread about my wedding cutting into their travel plans, and my mother had replied with the exact line she would later say to my face in front of 40 people. Don't worry, it's just a little party. We'll do the real celebration for you when the studio deal closes. She'll understand. She always understands. It was not a slip of the tongue at that dinner table. It was a script, rehearsed weeks in advance in a chat I was never invited into, then performed live for an audience of 40 guests, and she had smiled the entire time, because to her, it was not even cruelty, it was simply the family accounting read aloud. I put the phone down and, for the first time all weekend, I broke, just for a minute, somewhere nobody could see it happen. I did not cry for the empty chairs, or the toast, or even the wedding itself. I cried for a man who spent 40 years behind a hardware store counter so his granddaughter would never once have to ask permission to be happy, and whose final gift had been quietly burned down in Nashville without my knowledge, funding the absence of the people who were supposed to be sitting in that front row. Desmond found me on the porch and did not ask what was wrong. He simply sat down beside me and waited, and when I finally handed him the phone, he read every screenshot in silence. $42,000 of your grandfather's money, he finally said. That's not a slight, Nora. That's a breach of trust with an actual dollar figure attached to it. I know, I told him, but I'm not going to make it loud. If I get loud, my mother gets to tell everyone I'm the unstable one who dragged the family into court over money. She's spent 33 years building the story that I'm the difficult daughter. I am not going to hand her the final chapter of it. 3 days later, on the 9th day since the wedding, I received the call I had been quietly expecting since Renata Foss's first voicemail. Harold Preston's office was asking me to come to the corporate tower downtown, in person, Thursday morning. I told them I would be there, and I dressed simply, a plain navy suit instead of anything resembling armor, and Desmond drove me into the city without offering advice, only reminding me at a red light that I did not have to be gentle in there if I did not want to be. I know, I told him, but gentle scares them more. The regional president's office occupied the top corner of a glass tower with a view stretching toward the West Hills. When I arrived, 5 people were already seated inside it. Harold Preston, silver-haired and careful, behind a desk the size of a small boat. Renata Foss was standing near the window with a tablet. My father, folded into a chair that seemed to be swallowing him whole. My mother, who had invited herself the moment she learned I was coming, unwilling to let me tell this story without her present to control it. And Miles, who cannot stand to be anywhere the family's attention is pointed and not be somewhere inside the frame. Harold stood the moment I walked in, and that single gesture told my father everything, though he was still too frightened to fully read it. Regional presidents do not rise for a mid-level manager's estranged daughter. Miss Cole, he said warmly, thank you for coming. I'm so sorry to pull you in during what should be your honeymoon. My mother's head snapped sideways at the surname. Cole. She had now heard it twice from important people and still had not connected a single dot, because she had never once looked him up. I'll be direct, Harold said, sitting back down. A video of your wedding has been circulating. It's a beautiful clip and a difficult one. Ordinarily, an employee's family matter is none of my business, but this one is not ordinary, because of who your husband happens to be. The room went very still. My mother laughed, light and dismissive, a sound she had used on me 1,000 times before. With respect, Mr. Preston, Nora married some man she'd known 3 weeks. We were all quite worried. It's hardly a matter for company, Diane, my father said low, having gone the color of paper, and somewhere in those 4 seconds, watching Harold's face, he had already started to understand. Mrs. Ashby, Harold said, do you know who your daughter married? A man named Desmond, I believe. I don't know. Does it matter? It matters a great deal to this company, Harold said quietly, and that was the exact moment. Not a shout, not a slammed door, simply one calm sentence from the most powerful man my parents had ever stood inside a room with, telling them the stranger they had mocked and the little party they had skipped for a beach mattered a very great deal indeed. I watched it land on my father first. His hands began to shake, and Gordon Ashby is a man who prides himself on steady hands above almost everything else. Who is he? He finally whispered, not to Harold, to me. Nora, who did you marry? I let the silence stretch one more second before I told them. His name is Desmond Cole, I said. He founded Cole Hospitality Group 11 years ago. They own or operate roughly 60 properties across 4 states. I kept my voice flat, almost bored, the way you read a weather report. Mr. Preston's company has been trying to bring his group in as an anchor partner on the riverfront development for the last 2 years. I believe that's accurate. It's the single most important partnership currently on my desk, Harold confirmed, and I watched the words land on my mother like slow, cold rain. Some man. She had called him some man. There's one more thing you should know, I added quietly, about the Nashville deal. Miles, who had gone silent and gray in the corner, straightened sharply. Do you know why it collapsed? Because a due diligence team recommended against the underlying property 6 weeks ago, and the group that was going to acquire it walked away. That group was Cole Hospitality. Desmond's company killed your deal, Miles, weeks before he and I had even met. You took Grandpa's trust, poured it into a hole that was already dead, and skipped my wedding to pour more onto the ashes. And the one man who could have told you that in a single sentence was standing at the end of my aisle holding my hand while you did it. The room was silent enough afterwards that I could hear the air vents humming overhead. Harold cleared his throat gently, the way a man does when he needs a room to remember he is still standing inside it. "Gordon," he said to my father, "I want to be clear. No one here is in any trouble. Your daughter's marriage is a private and happy matter. It will have no formal bearing on your position." It was a polished, professional sentence, and everyone in that office understood it to be exactly the kind of lie people tell to be kind. Of course it would matter. My father had spent 2 years failing to get Desmond into a single meeting, and now his own daughter had married the man, and he had not been curious enough to even show up to the wedding. My mother found her voice last, the way she always does, reaching for the one tool she has ever truly owned. Her eyes filled, genuinely this time, not the performance from the video she would post later that same week. "Nora, sweetheart, why didn't you tell us?" There it was, the pivot, executed in under 90 seconds. She was not sorry she had missed my wedding. She was sorry she had missed the right one. I looked at her a long moment and thought of my grandfather in that hospital room, telling me I should never have to ask permission to be happy. "You didn't ask," I said quietly. "Not once in 3 weeks did you ask who he was, or how we met, or whether I was happy. You called it a little party, and got on a plane. He was never a secret, Mom. You simply never opened the box." I walked out of that office past the framed photograph of my father shaking Harold Preston's hand, and I did not shake, but the week was far from over. By the following weekend, the video had crossed 3 million views, and my mother, unable to sit inside silence for longer than a single day, filmed her own soft-lit video with a cardigan and an untouched tissue, telling strangers there were 2 sides to every story, that she was the grieving mother of an estranged daughter, that it broke her heart to miss my day. For 18 hours it actually worked. Comments turned. "Maybe the daughter's the difficult one," people wrote. "She did put those name cards on the chairs. That's kind of cold." Delia called me at 7 the next morning, spitting furious. "People are turning on you. Post the group chat, post the money. End her." "I'm not fighting her on her own field," I told Delia. "I'm never going to win the loudest woman contest. She's had 33 years of practice, and I've had none." "So you just let them call you a monster," Delia said. "For a few more hours, yes," I told her, because I knew where I was going that morning, into a conversation that would still be true long after every single comment scrolled away and vanished. My Aunt Vivian called that same week to warn me my mother had been crying at book club, telling anyone who would listen that I had gone cold the moment money entered my life. "Let her," I said. "Everyone in that parish already saw the video. They're being polite to her face and honest behind her back. That's exactly what she trained them all to do, including me." It was Vivian who finally brought me the paperwork, a manila envelope she set carefully on my kitchen counter, proof from a cousin who worked as a bank teller that Grandpa Otis had not simply handed my parents cash. He had set up a legal trust with my name listed as the sole beneficiary, and my mother named only as trustee. Moving that money without my signature was not a family disagreement. It was a matter with an actual name attached to it. "You could end them with this," Vivian said. "I know," I told her. "But I won't, not loudly. Maybe one day quietly through a lawyer on some ordinary Tuesday. Because the money should come home, but I am not going to wave it at a gala or hand it to a producer. It's a fact, not a weapon." On the 9th day, my mother called with a new voice entirely. Warm, wet, reconciled. "Come to the house Friday. Just family. Let's heal, please, for me." I went, because a boundary you never test in person remains only a wish, and I walked straight into an ambush. 2 aunts I had not seen in years, a pastor, Marjorie Pruitt from 3 streets over, Miles slumped on the couch performing Wounded Devastation, my parents arranged like grieving royalty, waiting patiently to be comforted by a room they had carefully stacked in their favor. "There she is," my mother announced to the audience the moment I walked through the door. "Thank you all for helping our family come back together." The pastor gestured toward an empty chair positioned dead center of the room, clearly meant to make me the defendant on trial. I did not sit in it. I stayed by the doorway instead, the same trick I had used in Harold's office, so I could face the entire room at once instead of letting them surround me. Nora, the pastor began gently, your mother tells me there's been a rift, and that you've come into some good fortune, and that pride can— Pastor, I interrupted quietly. Did my mother tell you why she missed my wedding? The room shifted visibly. She had a family emergency, I understand, he said. She flew to Nashville with my brother, I said, using money my grandfather left in trust for my wedding. She stood up in front of 40 guests and called my wedding a little party. Then she got on a plane. I have the trust paperwork and the group chat where they planned it. I didn't bring either one today, because I'm not here to prosecute anyone, but I'd ask you not to referee a rift you've only heard one side of. You could feel the room recalculate in real time. The aunts looked at my mother. Marjorie studied the carpet with sudden intensity. My mother's reconciliation mask cracked wide open. You see, she said, voice climbing sharply. You see how she is. She keeps records. Who does that to their own mother? And there was the tell, hiding in plain sight the entire time. Not who takes their granddaughter's trust fund, not who skips a wedding for a beach, who keeps records. In my mother's moral universe, the true sin was never the theft itself. It was my refusal to let her quietly rewrite what had happened. I didn't keep records to hurt her, I said. I kept them because for 33 years, every time she rewrote what happened, I started believing her version over my own. They're not for court. They're so I stop gaslighting myself on her behalf. The ambush collapsed exactly the way her rehearsal dinner performance should have, except this time, a viral video sat quietly underneath every single word. Miles found me 2 days later, alone at my apartment door, hands shaking, unshaven, panic barely contained beneath his usual careless charm. I need to talk to Desmond, he said. I told him Desmond wasn't home, though he was upstairs, and I wanted to hear exactly what my brother would say when he thought no one important was actually listening. Your husband could fix this in an afternoon. It's nothing to him, a rounding error, Miles said. Then why are you asking me? I asked. Because you're my sister, he said, and something in it sounded almost genuine, which made what came next so much worse. You don't help. I go to the press. I tell them you trapped a lonely rich man 3 weeks after meeting him, that the empty chairs were staged. How long do you think 2 million people stay on your side once your own brother calls you a gold digger? I felt the old floor drop out from under me for exactly 1 second, the reflex to fix it, smooth it, make it disappear. Then I heard my grandfather's voice from that hospital room, and I said, go ahead, tell them, and while you're at it, tell them where Grandpa's $42,000 actually went. Tell 2 million people you flew to Nashville on a dead man's savings, while your sister married herself in a greenhouse. You don't have a story, Miles. You have a confession. Go ahead and tell it. Miles left without another word, and he did not slam the door on his way out, mostly because I do not think he had the strength left in him to do it. Desmond came down the stairs a minute later, having clearly heard all of it through the vents, and he did not say good job or are you okay, or any of the small things a lesser man says just to feel useful in a moment like that. He simply handed me a cup of tea and told me my grandfather would have liked that last line. He'd have liked the whole thing, I said, and for the first time all week, I actually laughed. The following Friday, Harold Preston's company hosted its annual industry gala, the single biggest night of the regional calendar, and Desmond was the guest of honor. Every important name across 3 states would be filling that ballroom, and so, it turned out, would my parents, because my mother had RSVP'd the very moment she learned Desmond would be there. She had spent 33 years failing to show up for me. She was not about to miss the one room where showing up might finally pay off for her. I decided to go too, not to fight, but because I had exactly one thing left to say, and I wanted to say it in the very room my mother had spent her entire life trying to get inside of. The gala filled the old Beaux-Arts Hotel downtown, a ceiling painted to look like open sky, 400 guests, chandeliers, a step-and-repeat banner where people paused to be photographed. I wore deep green, my grandfather's favorite color, on me, though I did not consciously choose it for that reason, until I was already standing in front of the mirror. Desmond was pulled away almost immediately. The guest of honor rarely gets to stand quietly against a wall, and for the first hour I moved through that ballroom alone, and something happened that I want you to sit with, because it is the quiet center of this whole story. People sought me out, not because they knew me, but because they knew him, and word travels fast in a room like that. This is Cole's wife. She runs the design firm, the one who did the riverfront launch. Strangers shook my hand with both of theirs. A woman who owned half the hotels along the Gulf Coast told me my grandfather would be proud, and she did not know one single thing about him. She simply said it, and it landed anyway. I had spent my entire life being the daughter no one thought to ask about. In that ballroom, for 1 full hour, I was the person everyone wanted to have found first. Then, across the room, I watched my parents find me. My mother lit up instantly, scanning the crowd, clocking exactly how people angled themselves toward me, and she rearranged her whole face into warm, maternal pride, the exact expression she had never once worn at my expense before. She took my father's arm and crossed the ballroom toward me, with the biggest smile of the entire evening. "There she is," she announced, loud enough for the nearest dozen guests to turn. "My daughter, doesn't she look stunning? We are just so proud of her and Desmond." And she reached for me, both arms open. A public embrace built entirely for a public audience. I let her hug me. I did not stiffen or pull away. I let her wrap her arms around me in front of 400 of the most important people in her husband's world, and feel, for one entire moment, like she had finally landed the plane. Then I stepped back, just far enough, and asked her clearly, not loudly, "Mom, where were you 3 weeks ago?" Her smile held, but her eyes flickered. "Sweetheart, it's a simple question," I said. Gentle, level, the tone that always frightened her most. "Where were you 3 weeks ago at 11 in the morning?" "You know where we were," she said. Quieter now, a warning threading through it. "I do," I said. "I want you to say it. Here, in this room you always wanted me to get you into." And my mother, cornered at last, reached for the only tool she has ever owned. "I will not be ambushed at a party," she snapped, voice climbing, the performance cracking straight down the middle. "After everything I've done, do you know what it's like raising a child who humiliates her own mother in public?" She said it too loud, and that was her final mistake, because the hush around us widened, and I watched the entire room finally begin to see her clearly for the first time. "You weren't raising a child who does this," I said quietly. "You were skipping her wedding for a beach." Into the silence that followed, my father finally spoke, barely above a whisper, but the hush carried it. "She's right, Diane." My mother turned on him sharply. He lifted his head, and for the first time in my adult life, he looked at me like a person and not a convenience. "We skipped it," he said. "We took Grandpa's money. We told ourselves you'd understand, because we made you into someone who'd forgive us for anything, so we'd never have to earn it." "Thank you, Dad," I said, and I meant it. 4 years too late for Grandpa, and 3 weeks too late for me, but thank you. My mother had no crack in her, because she has never once believed she did anything wrong at all. "This is rich," she said, her voice dropping into something raw and ugly. "You want an apology. For what? For raising a daughter so cold she'd rather win than a family have? You got everything, the money, the man, the whole room, and it still isn't enough, is it? You still need my knees on the floor." 400 people heard her say it. I did not have to do a single thing. She did it entirely herself. Desmond appeared beside me then, quiet and steady, and he looked at my mother with the mild, terrible patience of a man who owns most of what she has ever wanted. "Your daughter is the most impressive person I have ever met," he said. "You had 33 years with her. I got 3 weeks, and I will spend the rest of my life grateful nobody in this room ever valued her enough to get in my way." I stepped in before she could answer, because I had one thing left to say, and I had waited my whole life to say it in exactly this room. I didn't come here to humiliate you, I said, gently. I came to tell you something, and then I'm going to go enjoy my night. For 33 years, I thought if I was good enough, quiet enough, useful enough, you'd finally choose me first, and 3 weeks ago you gave me the answer. There was no number, you were never going to choose me, because you decided a long time ago that my love was the one thing in this family you'd never have to earn. Respect is earned, Mom. It was never owed, and I'm done letting you skip that lesson. I took my husband's arm and walked back into the party, back into the life I had built with my own 2 hands, and I left my mother standing alone in the middle of the one room she had finally gotten into, understanding at last exactly what she had traded away for a beach. We danced under that painted sky, and for that one song, the room was entirely ours. In the months after, Grandpa's trust came home quietly through a lawyer. No audience, exactly as I had promised that drawer it would. A third of it funded a scholarship at a trade school in his name. Miles found an actual job eventually, and I hope it lasts. My father writes me now, real letters, no room watching, and once, over coffee, he said he should have walked me down that aisle, and I told him he should have, but I walked it just fine. My mother has never understood, and I no longer need her to. Respect is earned. It was never owed. That is the whole lesson, and I finally stopped waiting for her to learn it for me.